business. And then we'll spend just a little bit of time at the end, and one of the handouts specifically relates to some homework, which again, I think the other speakers have content that will be helpful to this as well, is to try to build a plan. So of developing a plan for your business as relates to adaptation strategies and minimizing your risk. So you can see this first slide here. Again, this, as Mary mentioned, Yukon Extension.
Kip, you haven't, you're not sharing.
USDA.
Kip, you got to share.
Uh-oh. Okay. It looks like it at my end. Let me see what happened here.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, you got it.
It's starting to share now. All right.
Okay.
Now you got to put your
We'll
PowerPoint
try
up.
again here.
Yeah, put your PowerPoint up.
Okay, can you see it now?
No, you've got the WebEx link. So click on your PowerPoint.
Yep.
Okay, now do your full screen. There you go. Now you're fine.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, it's hard to tell what's going on at this end here. So great, thanks for that. Yeah, so again, we'll get started here. And one of the things I like to, again, is we're focused certainly here on Connecticut. I think it's important to consider what's going on in the rest of the world as relates to impact of climate change. And again, as we look to possibly feeding 9 to 10 billion people on the planet, so what's that going to take? And we realize that there are some parts of the world that are going to be hit harder than others as far as droughts and floods and other climatic events, that so much of the world relies on fisheries for proteins. And of course, our fisheries and our oceans are in trouble as well. And some of the things to me that I think are really difficult to overcome is that in some parts of the world that heat and water needs are going to pass critical thresholds. It's going to be too hot for people to work outside, for some crops. So where we're going to be able to grow certain crops, have certain breeds of livestock is going to change. And then the predictability, I think, is the most difficult thing. And I know you certainly have experienced that as well. And that we're going to need to change how we eat and how we farm. So part of this is, even in here, Connecticut, what do we need to do differently as far as production areas and crops and how we farm and how we use our water and our infrastructure. So we realize for agriculture need to be successful, there are a variety of things that we need to have. We need to have suitable soils, predictable weather patterns, and as I said, to me, that's the most difficult, not having that predictability. A tolerance of temperature extremes, predictable precipitation. Again, it's not something that we have anymore as predictable precipitation. We need to be economically viable until, again, I think that we recognize how important agriculture and food systems, having regional and local food systems, is going to be. So how can we remain economically viable? A labor and customer base, the ability to transfer and share knowledge, and that's hard in a state that's not dominantly agriculture, is being able to share and learn from each other and innovate and adapt. And again, this is all about managing your risk in a variety of ways. So let's take a little more closer look at some of the impacts of climate change. Some of these things, depending on where you are in the state, you may have experienced more than others. And we know there are positive things that agriculture contribute to climate change. We know that agriculture can negatively impact emissions, particularly from manure and methane and use of fossil fuels, runoff, some of those other kinds of things that can impact ecosystems. And though there's a lot of positive things as well. And again, certainly as we can contribute to local and regional food systems, reducing transportation costs, organic food waste, again, that reduces emissions. We can store carbon in the soils, in plant materials, and we can, be responsible on our use of water, reduce flooding downstream, because as we know, so many of our farms have wetlands and stream systems. And then also we realize that on most of our farms, there's only a part of it that's really in production, and the rest of it are wetlands, forest, and wildlife corridors. So protecting that biological diversity, allowing other plant and animal species to migrate under climate change. And we don't talk enough about those other ecosystem services that well-managed farms provide. So again, 2023, the hottest year globally, and we don't really exactly understand why, but the Northeast, in particular Connecticut, is warming faster than some of the other surrounding states and some of the other surrounding regions. So 2022 is the hottest year on record in Connecticut. And we are going to be experiencing periods of short-term drought, and not necessarily more drought, but short periods of severe drought. We had that one that was 2.5 years, and even the last couple of years, there's part of the growing season where you couldn't buy a raindrop, so you need to be prepared for that as well. So this is every week, and that might be something that you might consider signing up for, is that USDA sends out a bulletin of looking at climate trends across the country. So this is a few months old, but every week they send out something that relates to drought and climate and moisture content. And then, of course, this year, what we really observed is too much water. So again, this was from 1901 to 2016, and Connecticut is getting wetter. And we realize that, as I talked about, getting warmer and the length of the growing season, of course, it's not always clear exactly when the start and stop of the growing season is going to be because of the unpredictability. But even USDA has changed some of the plant hardiness zone maps across the country, and even some changes here in Connecticut. You'll notice that, colder zone 5 has migrated north from some of the previous maps that we see, and the criteria, the areas of 6A and 6B have shifted a little bit as well. So let's review what happened in 2023 as we go into 2024. So 2023 was the warmest January on record. We've got a little blip of colder weather this week, and it's supposed to warm up again next week. And the 3-month trend from that USDA monitor shows, again, warmer than normal winter. Not that there's normal anymore. So I think we're going to end up having a fairly warm January as well. We had a dry late May and June, particularly when people were just trying to get plants in the ground. We had record warm April, October, the wettest July and August on record, a lot of flooding, ponding, erosion. There were some areas that had a lot of insect and disease and weed problems. So of course, as we know, when it's raining, pollinators are not happy, so poor pollination. And then wetness hampering harvest and planting. Those cold snaps, I'm sure that Mary heard from a lot of people, and a lot of fruit crops were impacted by those freezing temperatures. So, and when you get 4-6 inches of rain, all of those nutrients and pesticides that have been applied, they're either going to leach or they're going to run off, and then wet fields. So as we look about adaptation, mitigation, and resilience, so when I think of mitigation, it's really how do we reduce emissions? So, reducing fossil fuels, reducing methane from animal agriculture, and how can we try to get carbon out of the atmosphere and store it into plants and store it into ground, and agriculture can be really good about that. And then adaptation, so how do we moderate the harm and exploit the beneficial opportunities that we may have, and not only do it in Connecticut, but regionally. And then also of managing your risk, reducing your risk to various parts of your operation. So we want to have you understand the impacts of climate change, develop adaptation mitigation strategies, and try to develop these strategies and conservation practices that will enhance your resilience, and wherever possible, get the customers and elected officials and policymakers to understand the challenges that this creates for agriculture. And then right now there's an effort by federal and state agencies to create programs and risk management and crop insurance tools that are better able to help us with managing this risk and affording some of the conservation practices that we know will be useful for us. And then we also, it's not just the climate trends that are impacting us, but it's being prepared for these climate extremes and emergencies. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then to share what we know, what's working, what's not working, and have a resilient, adaptive, and economically successful agriculture. So again, we'll go into just a little bit more detail on some of these trends. And depending on where you are in the state, you may have experienced some of these more than others. You know, for instance, along Connecticut's coast, because of the maritime influence, typically they don't get as hot as some of portions of the interior portions of the state. And though the overall trend is that we're going to get warmer. So what you're seeing here of these two different scenarios, one is from if we do a better job of mitigating emissions versus a worse job as far as what the impact is going to be. And we know the very warm days are going to get hotter. So if you look at the number of days that are over 90 degrees, and then the other thing is it's not just over 90 degrees, it's also warm nights. And again, that really impacts the plant physiology of having not only warm days, but also warm nights. And it's going to happen in all seasons. So again, we talked about another warmer winter. And so overall trend is warmer in all seasons. And I've been talking with folks about people that are trying to do some land restoration, and up until this week, the lack of any frozen ground to get out there with equipment and not make a mess of your hedgerows and fields, trying to clear trees and brush and take down dead trees. So maybe we'll get a little frozen ground this week. So, and the free season is increased by about 3 weeks. Again, the challenge is, when does that start? When does it stop? And the very cold days become fewer. And we know that those cold days are important for trying to break insect and disease cycles. And the days without snow cover. There was, I guess, until we got watching the news this morning, that New York City finally had their over 1 inch of snow, and before that it had been 700 days since they'd had 1 inch or more of snow on the ground. So we've seen the decrease in snow covers, and from an ecological perspective, that's what our ecosystems have involved with having frozen ground and snow cover. So trees aren't happy, wildlife's not as happy, and again, breaking disease and insect cycles. And the growing season ends later, and up to 10% more rain. So, and it's not just that it's more rain, it's the intensity of the rain and the amount of rain that you're getting in each one of these events, because the atmosphere is warmer, it's holding so much more moisture. And because of the various microclimates and topography that we have in Connecticut, you can have these cells. You know, you can have a cell over your farm that's going to drop 4 inches of rain, and then 10 miles away, slightly different weather patterns, they may only pick up a 1/2 inch or 1 inch of rain. So it can be really, really spotty, but still very, very damaging, and particularly seen a lot of ponding, flooding, and soil erosion this year. Most of the increase is winter. This is one of those things that the modelers have said is happening. We've had some winter precipitation. I don't know that this has really come true quite as much as what was predicted, but you know, that's certainly possible. We know that kind of early and later in the winter, we've had quite a bit of rain. And when we have had snow events, that's typically when they've happened. And then again, as I mentioned, these extreme rainfall events of really intense rain over a short period. And then, as I said, we aren't necessarily going to get more droughts, but the drought periods that we're going to have are going to be intense drought periods. So that's what's predicted as well. So kind of looking at all those, so the change in seasons in New England, we're going to have more days over 90, these short, intense droughts, overall longer growing season, heavy precipitation, earlier snow melt. And then the other thing is, which is that because of the precipitation, it used to be along our major rivers, you'd only have flooding on the floodplains after the snow melt, the winter snow melt. But now, because of the atmosphere holding more moisture in these cells and weather patterns, as well as, you know, always the possibility of hurricanes, that you can have basically flooding at any time of the year along our rivers and streams. Warmer winters, fewer chilling days, and less predictability, which to me is, I'm sure, the most difficult thing for everybody. So, and though, you know, even though we have our challenges here, it's worse elsewhere in the United States. You know, we still have areas in the Midwest and the Southwest that are still going to have mega droughts and be in drought status and more temperature stress. You know, when you have 100 days over 90, over 100 degrees, as we know, there's only some activities that you can do it at night, and it just gets to be too hot to do outdoor work. And because of globalization, we also have new pests and diseases. So just, you know, a slight increase in temperature because of globalization, we're able to winter over new pests and diseases and less predictability. So for the Northeast and Connecticut, you know, sometimes we're going to have too much water, sometimes not enough, but we're going to have adequate water. So how can we manage and use our water more effectively? We're going to have longer and warmer growing seasons. There's going to be shift in productivity elsewhere in the United States because of these trends. So are there opportunities for us to capture, you know, a portion of a growing season for a particular crop that before someplace else was able to grow? So we have the potential to expand and diversify agriculture in the state. You know, the Northeast has 20% of the nation's population and 7% of the land base, and certainly makes a lot more sense from, you know, reducing food miles and food waste to grow more of our own food here. So opportunities for in agriculture of job creation. And again, I talked about protecting those ecosystem services. So we'll look at a little more detail about specific aspects of production and agriculture, what some of the impacts are. So we know heat stress, you know, obviously there are some things with varieties and things that you can do with some plants, you know, changing your dates of planting dates, and certain varieties do better. And though when it's really, really hot, that lettuce is going to bolt, and with intense hot periods, you know, you're going to get scalding of fruit. You're going to get drop of flowers, and livestock is not happy. Most of our northern breeds are not happy when it's hot. And as we talked about increased weed, pest, and disease pressure, we're finding that diseases and insects that we used to see at certain parts of the growing season have changed. So to be prepared for that, new crops and strategy and new diseases and insects that we haven't seen before are here. Some of it because of changing weather patterns, some of it because of globalization, some of it because of just it being warmer. So there's some kudzu on the left and a couple of unfriendly insects there. And then the change problem that we had this year is too much water, and largely to these big events. You know, our soils are pretty good at infiltrating water, and though they can only handle so much water, and because we have a lot of soils that have that hard pan, that restrictive layer, you know, the water just sits there for a longer period of time. And then we've had extreme events. There's some erosion on a floodplain, and then some fields with some ponding in between. So I think it's important that when we're looking at, like we did this year, and talking with farmers, they tend to lump ponding and flooding together. And I think as far as developing strategies and conservation practices, it's really important to differentiate whether you have flooding or ponding or soil saturation or some combination of above. So typically, as a soil scientist, flooding, we specifically talk about overland flow from a water body, while ponding is runoff collecting in low-lying areas. So the ponding could be because of saturation, because the soils are so saturated, or it could be maybe you have compaction, and that's why you have ponding. Could be a combination of all the above. So that's part of really investigating why you're having these wetness problems. And again, our soils are getting wetter. Talked about the short-term drought risk. What are your irrigation needs? Are they being met? In some parts of the state, there's a competition when we have these drought periods for water, where streams are being dried up. So if you're planning on irrigating out of a stream, one of these dry periods, and everyone's irrigating out of the stream, or there's a public water supply watershed in the same aquifer, that water might not be there. And then opportunities for perennial fruit crops. And I'm sure, Mary would have some thoughts about this. In general, you would think that there should be the potential for winter freeze damage. So are there new varieties and crops that can be grown? And though I would say probably some of the best red wines I've had in Connecticut were from a couple of those drought years with cooler nights and warmer days, some really good red wines in Connecticut. And though, as I said, the predictability. So, if you have plants coming out of dormancy and then you get one of these cold, windy periods, we know what can happen to fruit production. And the longer growing season, we're seeing more and more people that are doing double cropping, opportunities with some risk of triple cropping. I would say some of those, the past few summers with those periods of hot weather, I've had some of the best melons and tomatoes in Connecticut that I've ever had. Probably not going to get those bananas though. So, and then there are specific issues that relates to the physiology of the plants themselves. So we know that it's harder for some of our cool season crops, and thinking about when you're going to plant and harvest cool season crops, that grain, we're seeing some reduced grain yields, and in some cases the nutritional content is not as high with some of the changes resulting from climate change. And then there are some plants that need that vernalization. So for instance, apples, that my understanding is that there's some varieties like McIntosh, they really need a winter with some kind of the weather that we're having right now, so that if we don't have some of those cooler temperatures, there may be some varieties of fruit that we're just not going to be able to grow. And then, I think that the genetics of the maple sugar trees themselves, because they grow all through the Appalachian Mountain Chain, probably the genetics are there. We're not going to necessarily lose them from the forest, but are they going to be economically viable to be able to have a long enough season and predictable season to make it so that someone would want to have a business of tapping trees? And then we are seeing in our forests a lack of regeneration of sugar maples. We talked about pests and diseases, some new ones out there, and some of them we have good strategies for, some of them we don't right now. Some warmer season crops are going to do better. And water stress in crops from either too little or too much, and then soils that are too warm are cool and wet. So it's not only air temperature, it's also when we have really hot periods or cool wet periods of impact on soils, impacts plants as well. And then for those of you that have animal agriculture, particularly dairy cattle and dairy goats, They're not happy at all with higher temperatures, and they don't eat as well. They don't take in as much water. So typically you expect that milk production is going to be down. And then there are these other factors too. As I said, different plants have a different physiology as they adapt to the additional carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So some plants you might see an increase in yield initially, and then for other plants you don't. Or what we're finding is with some of the modeling that they've done, you can get to a high enough level of CO2 in the atmosphere that yields really start to decrease as well. The bugs eat more, weeds are harder to kill, herbicides are less effective. And, you know, for instance, everyone is struggling with vines of bittersweet, poison ivy, grapevines just sprouting up and growing everywhere. So the physiology of those plants, they love that additional CO2, and the poison ivy is more poisonous. And then also we're seeing more ozone damage to cucurbits and tobacco too. And this is something that the modelers haven't talked about, which they need to do more, is of these sustained periods of high winds that we can have, particularly those of you that grow in high tunnels of and greenhouses, of having these sustained periods of high winds, and these microbursts have caused a lot of damage. And I think part of it is because we're getting these wide swings in the jet stream, that you're having, you know, cold up against warm, and so you're getting these major wind events. So when I first came to Connecticut in '83, you never saw 24, 48 hours of sustained 40, 50 mile an hour winds, and we are experiencing that now. And then the other thing, as I said, is to really think about not just what I just mentioned of these different impacts of climate change and how it affects crops and agriculture, but to be prepared to the disasters. So the nor'easters and the hurricanes and the tropical storms. So you can see this map, the different occurrences that have happened throughout Connecticut. And so you need to prepare for those a little bit differently. So if you go to and one of the handouts that I sent was the farm emergency contact information and plan. So this is something that was developed with a grant through Connecticut Farm Bureau. I think it's a really useful tool to have, to be able to know, for those that may come to help you or to do an assessment on your farm, in your community, of where your assets are, that your emergency responders know, you know, that there's the potential of a road that might be out, or to have those backup generators and pumps and chainsaws, and know how to use them and have them be prepared, because at any particular time we can have one of these real weather emergencies, or know who else in the agriculture community has these skills and these facilities. So this creates a lot of uncertainty about, you know, is this just a one-time deal? You know, do I need to invest in a drainage system for these fields? Do I need to improve my irrigation system? I would say you probably need to do both. If you've had either, you know, wetness issues and also dryness issues. And I would say, you know, if you're starting a new fruit or vegetable operation, we certainly recommend that you have an irrigation system, because of these dry periods we are going to have. So as we look at adaptation strategies, you know, there's three ways you can go. You can resistance. Well, I'm just going to keep doing the same thing and take my chances. Or resilience. So you're going to try to do some things differently and adapt. And sometimes they're going to succeed or fail, but it's what we would call adaptive management. And then there are also these opportunities for transformation, of changing and doing things in a completely different way, or trying something completely different. So hopefully you'll rely more on the resilience and the transformation. And not all these things are within your control. Again, you know, on your farm, on your piece of property, the resources that you have, there are limitations. We know there are physical and ecological limits. There's technological limits. We know some varieties, there's just not a lot of flex to them as far as the conditions they can tolerate. But financial barriers, some of these things, if we're talking about new equipment and additional kinds of land to be able to farm, there are financial barriers. There's informational barriers. I've had a lot of conversations with Mary and Evan and other folks about that we really, because of the microclimates in Connecticut, we don't have enough local weather information to really help folks. Cognitive barriers, and then gender, social, and cultural barriers as well. So how are farmers adapting to climate change? It's a combination of a risk assessment, which we've talked some about, we'll talk more about, diversification of not, as they say, not putting all your eggs in one basket. There's a lot of truth to that as relates to an adaptation strategy. So whether it's varieties, crops, your business plan. And it's one of those things, it's never going to be a bad investment to improve your soil health and invest in your soil health and your soil health practices. That's going to benefit you in many ways, and it's a really important adaptation strategy. There's a lot of conservation practices out there that can work to try to limit the impact of climate change and some of the newly adopted production systems. So we'll look at these a little bit more. So as far as assessing your risk, again, my background as a soil scientist, and there are aspects that where farmers know quite a bit about their soils, and though a lot of misinformation and lack of knowledge about other aspects of their soils as relates to impacts of climate change. So know as much about your soils and your soil health status as possible. Really think about your infrastructure, not only now, but in the future. We know that because of the storm events that we're having, there's a lot of culverts and bridges that are undersized, a lot more impervious surface in our watershed, so a lot more water coming down through our wetlands and through our stream systems. Think about your management of how you're managing your nutrients, your pesticides, your irrigation, the tillage and cropping systems that you're using. Is there something there that you can tweak? Varieties and cultivars, breeds of animals, your timing of activities. As I said, some plants you have a window that you can try things a little bit differently. Some crops less so. Think about your customer and workforce management. You want to make sure that you're protecting your employees, you're protecting your customers as well from these impacts of climate change, and which you'll hear some more about, use of crop insurance. So what are you going to try to change this year? What you're going to need for assistance? That's something that we'd like to know and be able to help you with. So let's get into this a little bit more detail. Diversification, it can mean a lot of different things. It's your markets, your crops, your breeds, the kind of products, income streams in your family, and then also the land use that you're using. Maybe you have access to both drier fields and soils and wetter ones. So rather than continuing to put all of one crop in one part of the farm on one kind of soil landscape, diversify it a little bit. So if there's flooding or ponding in one area, some of the crop on some of the other soils are not going to be as impacted. And then to think about the regulations. Unfortunately, with 169 towns, not all towns are farm friendly. So some of the things that you might want to do, there may be regulatory hurdles. And that's something that, some of the organizations can help with, and something, again, to talk with local elected officials and policymakers about. Like just 2 weeks ago, there was a farmer that wanted to put in a high tunnel and was turned down by the town, a town that I would have thought would have allowed that, because for the size of the house that the building would be, they considered the high tunnel to be a structure, and it was too large considering the size of the house and the size of the lot, even though they really needed it to be able to diversify and be more successful with climate change. So understand your soil landscapes, again, your best soils, your well-drained soils, deep water table, gently sloping, nearly level. These soils are going to be most resilient to the impacts of climate change. Protect your groundwater recharge areas, wetlands and watercourses, where we're going to have those dry periods. You're going to need to try to capture extra ground and surface water, utilize that diversity of soil resources you may have on our farms. So, one of our challenges is that Connecticut has really, really diverse soils. You can have a 7-acre field that has 4 different soils on it. And though, if you understand those differences, that can also be a benefit to how you manage it, what you plant, where, and why. So, and again, if you haven't used the Web Soil Survey, it's a really good planning tool to help you understand your soil resources on your property. And though, keep in mind that it's a planning tool, and because our soils are so complex, you can't possibly, soil scientists couldn't possibly show all the different soils on a piece of property. So if you're interested in changing something, doing something different, really understanding the soils and as relates to climate change and what they might be suitable for, nothing beats an on-site investigation with a soil scientist who's someone that's really knowledgeable about soils. And then, as I said, it's never a mistake to invest in your soil health. So looking at your nutrients, how you're managing your water, your organic matter, how you're controlling erosion. Never hurts to keep your soils covered as much as possible, keep living roots in the soil, trying to minimize the amount of tillage practices that you're doing, make sure you're controlling erosion, and also, when we get these hot periods, of being able to suppress weeds, conserve moisture, cool the soil, and then again, one of those major emphasis of soil health is providing habitat for the soil organisms and to keep those happy, because then they're going to keep the plants happy. So one of those really easy to use tools, and again, need to think about it differently as far as the equipment that you have and your cropping systems, are green manure and cover crops. This is going to give you additional organic matter. It's going to store carbon, so you're doing something for mitigation as well. It's going to hold more moisture, reduce erosion, control weeds and disease. And again, those with animal agriculture, really seeing the benefits of having rotational grazing systems, of being rotating animals around. Think about the plant species that you're having in various paddocks so that they are more, can provide the forage you need at different times of year. I would say that one of those things, we've relied on cool season grasses, and because of these hot, dry periods, in some cases the forage isn't there. So, perhaps growing some warm season grasses. Perhaps if you have a lot of water, even doing some irrigated pastures are a possibility. And we know reducing your tillage with this graph on the right, by reducing your tillage, getting more water in the ground, you're going to have less runoff, less erosion, and more water for plants to use. And then the organic matter and infiltration, the same thing. It holds the moisture and it also releases the moisture very, very effectively. It seems counterintuitive, and though that's the way it works, because it really helps with your soil structure. And particularly if we have a lot of sandy soils, so it can hold moisture that plants can access. And then how we manage our nutrients. So you'd think, well, just because it's hot, what's that going to do to my nutrients? So actually you can increase your volatilization of nitrogen. It's harder for the plants to take up what they need when they're stressed because of high soil temperatures and air temperatures. And again, when it's drought, you can end up having reduced nutrient use efficiency. And what we saw this year with these extreme rainfall events, because of our sandy soils, that you're getting more runoff of nutrients and pesticides, and that it just either runs off or it leaches down through the soil profile below the root zone, and plants can't access it. So we know there are things we can do differently as we manage manure and try to increase our organic matter and manage organic matter, and having a compost system. I think in creating good compost, rather than having to purchase it I think that's an opportunity, and also working with municipalities. Everyone's interested in getting organics out of the waste stream, so perhaps there's an increased role for agriculture to help with that, and maybe some payment for that. And then these are the things that you typically think about for adaptation, these newly adopted systems of using high tunnels and hoop houses and a variety of row covers, and really thinking about your breeds and varieties that you're using. And as I talked about, the not all your eggs in one basket, this idea of, maybe so far you've invested heavily in tomatoes. You make a lot of money on tomatoes. Well, maybe not every year is going to be able to be a good tomato year, particularly if you're not doing any of it in a high tunnel. So maybe you're going to try some low investment pre-harvest crops. So maybe some early season greens or radishes or something like that, so that if other crops fail, you'll still have some income. Look for those resistant crops. Really study those sheets about different varieties. Some are much, and even bringing in varieties from elsewhere, from different parts of the world that maybe we haven't grown before, as far as fruit and veg crops. Double cropping, the silvopasture, that idea of bringing trees back into grazing systems, offering a little bit of shade, and reducing that tillage. So again, here's just some pictures of some different technology that people are using, either to modify air and soil temperatures, reduce weeds, even raising up with the bed makers, raising up those soils 2 to 4 inches. It warms them up faster, keeps those roots out of the water. And then here's what really the poster child for climate change adaptation is: a high tunnel. And you can extend those shoulder seasons, try alternative crops. You do need to be careful about how you manage your soil health in those facilities. And then your high tunnel location. So again, when we are going to have a heavy wet snow, making sure they're far enough apart, and also put them on your best soils, your well-drained soils. And again, we are finding with these severe events, you think about all the water that comes off of that plastic, of making sure that you have some sort of, you might need a drainage system along each side of the high tunnel, or at least a swale of some sort, so to carry the water safely away, so you're not getting your planting beds saturated. So here's some of those practices for managing water: diversions, raised beds, surface drains and ditches, stone line waterways. These are a lot of practices that in the past that USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service, has helped with. Some of them they're more willing to help with than others, and there are certainly some contractors out there that are certainly capable of helping you install some of these practices. And here's what some of them would look like. And they've got some contour strips there in the upper left. You've got some raised beds there in the middle. Got a stone line waterway. Sometimes it's just there's too much water and you can't control it with grass, so you need to bring in stone to control it. Some ditching, and then of course subsurface drainage. And again, all of our soils are getting wetter, and particularly noticing it in the soils that have that hard pan, that firm, dense glacial till at about 2 feet. So drainage systems can be very effective. And again, I really like folks with either getting a bed maker or a rotary plow, that you can create a bed, prevents waterlogged plants, soil warms up faster, and you can put down your drip tape and plastic or fabric or mulch over that as well. And again, if any of our structures, you really need to think about that water and where that water is going. And this is using wood chips in a heavy use area for some beavers. And then again, we're finding that people are putting in more fans, high roofs, putting shade back in pastures. I've seen with some folks that with having layers out there on pasture, of putting up some of those shade cloth like you'd see people using at the beach just to get an opportunity for the poultry to get out of the heat in the middle of the day. And I'd say what's most important here, as I said, we've talked a lot about organic matter. And for every, so when you're getting your soil test, I think it's worth getting the organic matter content and know what your baseline is. In some of our soils, particularly sandy soils, it's difficult to keep the organic matter in there. So for every 1% increase of organic matter, that's another inch of water that's available for your plants to easily use. And then when we have these wet periods, which is really tough, you know, you've got field activities that you need to do of harvesting and weed control and things like that. As much as possible, stay out of wet fields. You know, if you have more than a ½ inch of rain, I would say try to stay out of them for 24 hours if you can. So, because that way you're going to avoid compaction. Our soils are very susceptible to compaction because they tend to be a little sandier and don't really have particularly strong structure the way that soil particles are held together. And I think there's a lot more we can do with the moisture sensors and really understanding the soil moisture in the field and when it needs to be irrigated and not. There's actually on the Connecticut Risk Management website that there's a video I did on my field with your hand. You can train your hand to understand how much moisture is in the soil and when you need to irrigate. So you don't even really have to have a soil moisture probe or device. And then micro irrigation, you know, an improving irrigation system, I think is very helpful. There's a lot of opportunity there. Buried main lines, so you have less water, water loss. And then people are increasingly using fertigation of various sorts. So you're really placing where fertilizer is and when it's used. And again, I'd like to see if anybody that's putting on a new roof, putting up a new structure, in a wet year, you're not going to need it. In a dry year, or with our low yielding wells that we typically have, a lot of our bedrock wells, of doing a rainwater harvesting and catchment system. They're relatively inexpensive to put in, and it can save a crop. And then also on all of our high tunnels and greenhouses, you know, now they're starting to build them with these catchment systems within them, but there are also some hacks out there. And I have one from Iowa State of how to put gutters like this person did on the side of their high tunnel and feed it into a cistern, which then they're able to use right there in the high tunnel. And then, you know, there's other things we can do from mitigation of reducing emissions, taking carbon out of the atmosphere, of solar panels, agrivoltaics, where you're combining solar panels and agriculture, geothermal, energy audits, energy conservation is where our biggest change and our biggest input with the least amount of cost is going to happen. And also use of biomass. I know, you know, there's that past generation of wood burning facilities that were smoky and rather unpleasant, but the new ones are really very, very efficient, meet air quality standards, and we have a number of producers that are using pellets or wood chips to successfully heat their greenhouses and their farm structures. And then we do have some biodigesters. Again, those are big budget items. There are some turnkey systems out there. That's one at Fort Hill Farms in Thompson. And then again, you know, folks are interested in perhaps there may be opportunities for ecosystem payments of carbon capture. And we know that cover crops and green manure crops and perennials are really good at capturing and storing organic carbon, and also of being careful about how we use nitrogen and the source of nitrogen, and use local wood in construction, because then you're having long-term storage of carbon. And we have a lot of forest land out there. So, you know, there are soil health and forest management practices that can increase the stored carbon and sequestered carbon. So we know NRCS has their carbon, their climate smart conservation practices. They're a little bit limiting. They're not the full range of practices that we really need. Hopefully they'll get there. And though there are some of the other organizations that are funding some of these practices. There have additional practices beyond just the NRCS current ones that are being funded, particularly as relates to some of the irrigation practices. So, and I believe later on, Emily Cole, who's the Connecticut State Executive Director for Farm Service Agency, is also a soil scientist and did a lot of work on soil health. So this was a couple of years ago, some work that she did of just looking at our cropland areas in Connecticut. If we change some of our conservation practices, what difference that would make as far as metric tons of carbon dioxide per year that would be sequestered, and that it's the equivalent of, you know, over 25,000 cars off the road annually if we were to implement those kinds of conservation practices, which is pretty significant, as well as all those other benefits to soil health and reducing costs. And there's some really good information out there that you may or may not be aware of. So from the USDA Climate Hubs and the Cornell Institute for Climate Change and Agriculture. So they have, and again, there's, it utilizes, the Cornell site utilizes local data. So that's the other thing why I'm hot on getting more local climate data and with soil moisture probes to really feed into the system, because there are these planning tools that are really easy to use, and they're developing new ones all the time. So here's a list of, I don't know how up to date this is, of, you know, water deficit calculator, Apple freeze damage tool, and this one's I've used quite a bit, this winter cover crop planting scheduler. And so this is looking at just the probability of success of having a successful cover crop establishment based on the date. And so you can kind of see from a, you know, risk management standpoint, or also of, we know that as you get towards the end of the season, just by doubling the pounds per acre, that you can increase your success as well. So I think this is a pretty useful tool for us. And so we know that adaptation is, you know, it's not up just to you on an individual farm to make this happen and to be successful. So we know that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. We need new decision tools. We need to have new crop and livestock options. I know that, you know, the dairy industry is looking at bringing some of the genetics of some of the dairy breeds from other parts of the world that do much better in hot weather conditions, getting some of that genetics into some of our, you know, like Holstein breeds. And more local weather data. We need more enhanced pest monitoring and data sharing. And then again, you know, plan for the disasters as well. Utilize those crop insurance programs. We certainly need to continue to tweak those and make them work better for us. And then make the financial assistance investments for adaptation. And right now there's actually a lot of money out there in Connecticut and USDA programs to help us making some of these investments. And then we know that there are policies, land use and climate change policies that that need to happen to make it easier for us to be successful. And then you know, having secure land tenure, if going to having a formal lease so that you can make some of these investments rather than just a year-to-year lease, because so many of our farmers rely on rented land. That's a challenge. It's a more secure land base, talking with those landowners about why you need to have it to be able to make those investments, I think is helpful. And so just kind of a summary of all of these different pieces here that I think are successful farm level adaptation strategies. So focus on soil health. It's always a good investment. You know, watch your tillage frequency and intensity, know what your organic matter is, continue to put organic matter into the soils, use mulches and raised beds to be able to manage that soil temperature and soil moisture. Make sure that you're rotating families of crops and use more perennials, because again, with our smaller acreage and trying to outwit those disease and insects, certainly crop rotations are a really important tool. Try to reduce compaction and avoid bare ground as much as possible. Excuse me. Really try to be efficient how we're managing our water resources, drainage systems, irrigation systems, protect our riparian areas and wetlands. They really are important to as sponges and moving water safely off the landscape, recharging our aquifers because we have so many low yielding wells. And certainly don't use all of your fertilizer at planting time because of these rainfall events, of having to break up those applications of fertilizer and manure can be really important. And then a lot of our farms that are looking to diversify, of integrating some of those concepts of agroforestry, permaculture, silvopasture, I think there are opportunities there as well. And then crop management systems, be doing the scouting, know how to do IPM, really look at your varieties that you're using, and practice sanitary farming practices. So we're going to reduce the spread of these, and test your soils and compost regularly. And then, where possible, diversify those farm enterprises, be open to the opportunities there, and considering, high tunnels, greenhouses, and controlled environment agriculture as part of it. And if possible, diversify the soil resources you're using. So as far as land that you may own or be thinking about owning or leasing, so that you have a variety of soils, so whether it's wet or dry conditions. And if you're a livestock producer, obviously that's a challenge. Keep those animals happy with shades and fans and sprinklers and diet adjustments. And this idea of really of stockpiling forage and planting more warm season grasses as we continue to get warmer. And then the farm planning. So it's the conservation planning, it's the whole farm energy audits, it's using these farming apps and weather tools. Really a higher level of management is needed. And then really think about purchasing, leasing equipment. And right now, as I said, there's money out there, and utilizing crop insurance to reduce those risks. And there's a lot of organizations out there. And again, there's money out there right now, and we're certainly able to help you, steer you in the right direction to agencies and programs that can be beneficial. And consider too of signing up for one of the one-on-one consultation sessions, which Mary can talk about a little bit further, but there's a bunch of those that are coming up. And then obviously, we're all really interested in suggestions or barriers that you're finding out there, so that we can work as organizations and talk to our elected officials about what needs to happen. So kind of the last part that I wanted to do is, I'm hoping that we've given you this overview of what the risks are, what the impacts are, some potential strategies, is to actually have you develop a plan for your farm, an adaptation plan for your farm. So the handouts that were provided, those are part of something that was developed by the Climate Hub, the USDA Northeast Climate Hub, and it's from an adaptation resource for agriculture responding to climate variability and change. And the sheets that I'm going to present were adapted by Julie Fine from American Farmland Trust, because we both thought that there's great information in that whole USDA Climate Hub, but I would say it's not as user-friendly as maybe we would all like to see. So Julie really did a good job of shortening it a little bit. And I've added a couple of other tools in here that I think are useful from having worked in conservation planning and working with farmers. So again, part of it is that really these 5 steps here: define your farm goals and priorities. So To me, that's always an important part. And obviously, as part of your farm businesses, you're doing that anyways. So any farm business decision you're making, climate change adaptation should be a component of any business decision that you're making. And then on your specific farm and in your community, what are identify some specific climate impacts, ways that you've been impacted, or you realize, hey, I dodged a bullet this time, but I know maybe next time I'm not going to be able to dodge it. So what can I plan for? What do I expect the impacts are going to be? So you're going to do a risk assessment on your farm based on what you've experienced or what you can expect, plus your goals, and then look at these adaptation practices that we talked about, and then evaluate the effectiveness of them. So again, you're going to identify your goals, and then really think about on your specific property of which of these things, so whether or not you've experienced a drought and impacted on certain fields, or that you've had ponded or flooding, or that you've had a structure that's been impacted by heavy winds and damage. And again, I would encourage you as much as possible to check out your soils on the web soil survey, learn as much about your soils on your farm or piece of property that you're intending to farm or lease before you really understand the limitations and the potential. So this is just a little exercise I'm going to go through of kind of how to simplify that information, because I don't expect everybody to become a soil scientist. This is a farm that I was out on up in Enfield. You can see on the right, I used the web soil survey tool, and I created a map, and you can see each one of these polygons, as we call them, those lines with a symbol in the middle, are dominated by different soils or a couple of different kinds of soils that have specific properties and limitations and potential. So I've outlined my soils. And then if you click on the names of each one of those, it tells you something about the soils. And there's a lot of information in the soil survey, but at the minimum, it's going to tell you something about the properties, how sandy, silty, clay, the depth of water table, the depth to a restrictive layer of some sort, how much moisture it's going to be able to hold. So there's a lot of great information. I've given you a sheet here of just doing a sketch. So kind of do a sketch of your farm, of where your infrastructure is and where the fields are, and maybe something about the fields that, as far as the potential threats and opportunities as relates to these climate change strategies that we've talked about. So I took this field and I simplified it a little bit. So I know that through the middle there, you can see there's a sign that says road runoff. So there's runoff that comes off of the road. Of course, towns in the state are not very good. They could care less about sending water into our farm fields. So this ditch has filled in over the years and has made these fields actually a little bit wetter. So I would be aware of that. So I probably would try to improve that ditch system that comes down through the farm, deepen it and stabilize it a little bit. And if I can, control the water and control the quality of the water, maybe a little detention basin there. Because right now the only water source is the stream that's on the western side of the parcel. And it's a perennial stream, but doesn't have great flow. There's a lot of changes to the watershed. I'm unsure about the water quality. So in a dry year, I don't know that I could count on that as an irrigation source. So maybe I could do a pond there and capture some of that runoff into there and fill up that pond and be able to use that as well. And a couple of those fields have are a little bit on the wet side, and there's enough drop from the upper part of the field to the lower part of the field. I think subsurface drainage would be a really good investment here in these fields. And then you can see down there in the lower part, there's erosion I have written there. Well, there's a little bit more slope there. There's some higher end of B slopes, closer to 7-8%. So, and you can see that the way it was farmed before, the rows are going up and downhill. So probably what I would do, I'd certainly make sure that I'm using a good cover crop mix, might change my tillage practices, and and it's a fairly square field. I would just orient my in that upper part where there's more slope, I would orient my rows the other way and have them be on the contour, at least cross slope, so there'd be less erosion. And then as far as diversification, actually that area that's wooded, it says dry, there's dry and gravelly soils there. So when I looked in there, I said, you know, really, if someone wanted to, rather than just doing vegetables, it was a former tobacco farm, but doing vegetables now, you know, maybe that would be a site of some drier sandy soils that it might be interested to put in a small orchard or some grapes or brambles or something like that. So just tried to simplify what I know about soils and what are some of the limitations of this particular property. And so you're going to write your risks and vulnerabilities on there on your farm, and identify how they relate to their goals. And then the next thing is you're going to really look at those adaptation practices and strategies. So as I said, you realize that part of it is susceptible. You've seen erosion is susceptible to erosion. So you want to keep your soils and your nutrients, your organic matter, and your soil in place. So what would be some strategies to do that? And so again, I've put in a worksheet there of what your field or your infrastructure is, what are your potential climate change impacts, and then try to figure out what the strategies are going to be to try to correct it or modify that in some way. And then here's some of the things that we talked about of looking at your strategies and then what are particular conservation practices that are going to be effective. So for instance, you know, if it's animal agriculture and there's stress on livestock, so what are some things that you could do? Or with from soil wetness and ponding, what are some adaptation practices that might be helpful? You know, as I said, creating shade for animals. You know, we talked about this idea of silvopasture, or putting some trees back into a pasture. And then, you know, it's what we call adaptive management, is you're going to try things and you're going to see what works or doesn't work. So you're always interested in evaluating it. You know, I know that there's a number of farmers that actually do a really good job of, and, you know, of course, when we start talking about crop insurance, about your documentation, but a really good job of in each field, what they've planted, what the conditions were, what worked, what didn't work, as relates to planting dates and varieties and things like that. And I think that documentation and really using that information can really help you with the adaptive management piece as well. So I'd really like you to take these sheets and give it a try. Certainly interested in feedback, and try to really create a plan for adaptation, mitigation and adaptation of these climate change impacts that we're struggling with, because we need agriculture. These last couple of pages, as I said, I think it's important to understand what's going on in other parts of the country as well. I think this is kind of an easy to understand list of in other parts of the country of what's going on with their weather, and are there opportunities to take advantage, you know, not that you want to take advantage of somebody else's hard times, and though you want to be economically viable and you want to be able to have consumers have choices as well. So is there something we can take advantage of because of threats in other parts of the country, other parts of the world? And so that's what those are, with some kind of easy to use icons. So I think it's useful. And thank you so much for tuning in and paying attention. And again, there are one-on-one consultations available if you'd really like to talk about these some more or anything else. I am available for some of those one-on-one sessions, and hopefully you'll work on an adaptation plan. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kip. If anybody has a question, please unmute and ask them one. I will be sending out the one-on-ones to everyone today. They're going to be going out on multiple email listservs too, so you may also receive them multiple times. But this is a great way to talk to someone, and Kip is one of the ones we're going to have on there. You got 50 minutes to talk with someone about something that that impacts you and your farm business. So, does anyone have questions for Kip?
And if I don't know, I probably know somebody that does know. So.
Thanks, Kip. So we're going to move into Dr. Emily Cole, who is the State Executive Director for USDA FSA, and she's going to talk about some of the programs that she has. So I'm changing presenters to Emily. Okay, so now you can do the share screen, Emily.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. And can you see the presentation?
No. Go to share and then share content.
Okay. All right. Okay. You can probably see yourselves on my screen now, hopefully.
No.
Let's see. All right. It is a revolving ring, so hopefully it's going to share it soon. If not, it's certainly something that I can share out afterwards and can just speak on without slides if need be.
It's not showing up yet.
Yeah, it seems like I'm having some bandwidth troubles where it doesn't want to share it. I'll give it one more try. All right, well, if it decides to share, I will share it, but I'm going to go ahead and move forward and so that we don't waste anybody's time on this snowy morning. So I'm Dr. Emily Cole. I am the State Executive Director for the Farm Service Agency here in Connecticut. And I want to just provide some high-level programmatic issues, or excuse me, not issues, but highlights that can help you address issues that you have on your farm, especially that might help you mitigate risk that aligns with changing climate and other financial issues that might pop up on your farm. And so to start with, the Farm Service Agency is a sister agency to who you might be more familiar with, which is the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And we work closely with NRCS. And we are the both sort of the administrative arm of that part of the USDA, but we're also the financial arm of that USDA. And so we help you with your eligibility with programs both within Farm Service Agency, but also NRCS. And then our programs focus really on three sort of buckets of support. We have our farm loan program, and it can be everything from an annual operating loan to help support just what you need to do to get through a season before you can actually sell your harvest, to ownership and land acquisition support loans. So that's sort of a large piece of what we do. We also have a second bucket of price support programs. We can, if you are a dairy, there may be some loss to corn production. There might be some milk price support that we could provide. But what I want to focus on today is really our third bucket of financial support, and that is our disaster assistance programs. And our disaster assistance programs come into play when you on your farm experience a significant loss. And individual programs are going to have different sort of loss thresholds and some different loss requirements, but I want to provide you an overview of what some of those programs are today. So the first program, and this is one of the broader disaster assistance programs, is the Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program. Now, we call it NAP for short, and this is for any crops that you have on your farm that are not eligible for more traditional crop insurance. Typically, if you have a diversified vegetable farm, that might be the program that would be a good fit for you, or perhaps you have a specialty crop that is just not covered under crop insurance. And crop insurance eligibility can change from county to county, even within Connecticut. So it's always a good idea, if you're interested in having some crop insurance coverage, to just check in with your local Farm Service Agency office and see if you have more traditional crop insurance, or if you are able to get the NAP insurance. By chance, can you see my screen now? Okay. So NAP provides assistance for these non-insured, non-typically insured crops to protect against natural disasters. And that can either be that you have a decrease or perhaps a complete loss of yield, or it could also just be that you are unable to plant because of a natural disaster. And the crops that fall under NAP eligibility are really wide ranging, but they're crops grown for food, whether it's for human consumption, or it could be that are crops planted and grown for livestock consumption. You know, grain and even forage are all eligible under NAP. What's also eligible are controlled environment crops. So it could be that you grow mushrooms or other, you know, hothouse tomatoes. Those can also be eligible. We cover specialty crops like honey and maple sap. We cover some aquaculture crops, and we also, there's a lot of industrial crops, less likely to be grown in Connecticut, but we do have a lot of value loss crops in Connecticut that are eligible under NAP, including Christmas trees, other aquaculture crops like oysters, and other sort of similar value loss crops where you may lose that at a stage where it wasn't ready to sell, but you have now lost that production for the future. So the eligible causes of loss include pretty severe weather that we see here in Connecticut: drought, freeze, hail, excessive moisture like we had this summer. So it's not just the flooding, but really excessive amounts of rain repeatedly that can basically bog down your crop and the soils, and that can be eligible. We don't have a lot of earthquakes here, but other natural occurrences that adversely affect your crops are eligible. One thing that we do want to sort of highlight here is that the adverse weather condition or the adverse natural disaster has to happen during the normal coverage period of that crop. So if it happens outside of the normal period from planting to harvest, it is not eligible under NAP. So how does NAP work? Well, there is a application and there is a fee associated with signing up for NAP. So you have to think, you know, proactively and sign up for NAP for the coming harvest year. And so the basic coverage will basically cover 50% of what was expected to be produced at 55% of what the average market price for that crop is. And there have been some, you know, issues around what the price point that we have for a lot of our specialty crops here in Connecticut. And I will just urge you, if you are a specialty crop grower, to share your yield and your average market value prices with farm service agencies so that we can get you the best, most accurate price to use when we're looking at the coverage levels here. You can get higher levels of coverage for added cost, ranging from 50% up to 65% of what the normal production would be, and up at 100% of the average market price. So, you know, added costs can get you pretty well covered. If you elect to buy elect to get the buy-up coverage, that premium is in addition to the regular fee. So there's a few forms that your local FSA office would walk you through in terms of getting you applied for NAP. And there are specific deadlines for each crop based upon sort of a normal harvest date, whether they're a spring planted crop, a fall crop, perennial crop. So this is, it would be way too much detail to go through here in a short presentation. So I urge you to reach out to your farm service agency, and they have all of those deadlines at that local office ready to help you. Something that is new really in the past calendar year is that underserved producers who can complete and submit a CCC 860, which is the certification that you are an underserved producer. That form will serve as NAP application for coverage, and there is no fee. So the basic coverage fee is waived if you are an underserved producer. So we've tried to make that sign up in the application for NAP easier. So you can refuse it if you want, if you're filling out the CCC 860 for other reasons, but it can serve as your automatic application for NAP and fee waiver. A similar program to NAP is TAP. It's structured a little bit differently. It's the Tree Assistance Program. So this is for orchardists and nursery tree growers who have lost their trees, bushes, vines by natural disasters. And this actually helps to replant or replace the stock that was lost, or rehabilitate trees, bushes, or vines that are you're able to rehabilitate. So this is structured a little bit differently in that there has to be sort of a certain threshold of death or loss of those vines or trees or bushes. And that has to be at least a 15% mortality loss. And that has to be above and beyond what might be a normal loss. So let's say you have 100 Christmas trees and perhaps there's a 3% normal mortality loss. It would have to be 15% above that to be triggered for a potential payment. The loss must not have been preventable through reasonable or available measures. It has to be visible and obvious to FSA representatives. Or if it's something where the cause and the loss is not necessarily obvious, you can have a qualified expert come in to determine that loss and provide that information to FSA if it's something that we can't identify ourselves. To qualify for TAP, beyond the 15% mortality, you also have to have owned these trees when the natural disaster occurred. But you're not required to own the land. We work with a lot of farmers who rent land for their farms, as is the case with most Connecticut farmers these days. Land is really expensive. So as long as you have a valid lease or can establish that you have rights to be on that land, we can work with you. And we will replace eligible trees within 12 days from the date of the TAP application being approved. We'll provide you the payment to replace them, and then you have to replace them. The next disaster support program I want to discuss is ELAP, and ELAP is somewhat broad in that it can cover livestock, honeybees, and farm-raised fish. So USDA is working on really supporting more of our aquaculture folks here in Connecticut. This program covers losses due to adverse weather or another condition, but it must be determined that it's a significant event by the USDA secretary. So we basically have to say, yes, a disaster was declared here, or the certain indications of a certain length of drought have been met, and then that will trigger ELAP program availability in the county or the state affected. So this covers not just the actual yield, the actual crop, but it also covers sort of things required in support of producing that crop. So it might be grazing losses for cattle or other livestock. It could be other livestock feed losses that you've had. It could be loss of additional cost, loss of revenue because of your need to transport water if we're in a drought, or haul feed. So all of these added costs due to this disaster or this adverse condition that's been approved by the USDA secretary can trigger ELAP payments. So this past year, we've had quite a rough time with the water, and so a lot of hay and haylage yields and stores for the winter are down. So we can actually, in an approved disaster situation, we can support that added cost of trucking and buying feed to support your livestock. So a lot of various types of livestock are eligible. However, the key here for ELAP right now is that these are grazing animals. And so we have a lot of confined livestock in Connecticut, and we are working to open this program up to that, but we are not there yet. So right now we are really focused in ELAP on animals that are being grazed. So if they would have normally been grazing, but the pasture quality was down, or the pasture yield was down, or just inaccessible, then we can help support payments for that disaster, the disaster causes in the ELAP program. For honeybees, this includes any bees that are housed in a managed hive. used for honey production. So there's a lot of other types of species that bees that are not eligible. But if you are doing any sort of honey production, pollination, or honeybee breeding with a managed hive, then we can cover losses to the colony, to the hive, or to feed losses due to any of these adverse weather or loss conditions. So again, we have to sort of look above and beyond the normal mortality rates for approved payments here. So there's a lot of fish that are eligible, and I'm just going to sort of go through this quickly, but it can be bait and game fish. It can be human consumed species. It can be, fish that are raised as food, ornamental fish, and any other sort of commercially produced fish are eligible here. So there are some losses to these farm-raised fish that would be above and beyond normal mortality that can be covered. We can also cover losses of feed for farm-raised fish. Those are the big disaster programs that we have here, but there's another program that I want to just highlight briefly. And this is helpful in not necessarily mitigating financial risk, but this mitigates the financial outputs you have to actually put there. So we have the Organic Certification Cost Share Program, and this can help cover your application fees if you are trying to move towards organic, or if you are moving towards organic and you're trying to get certified. This is a very simple program where you provide receipts, you show your certification once you've received it, and you can get a good portion of those fees paid back through FSA programs. Okay. So those are the high level programmatic, I'd say programmatically relevant pieces of FSA programming, but I want to take a minute, Mary, if we have the time, and just open up for any questions that anyone might have.
Sure. Any questions from anybody? I'm not hearing anything, and there's nothing in the chat. So thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to Amanda Chang. She's with the Carrot Project, talking about crop insurance, financial management, business planning, and whatever else there is to do with financial risk on the farm. I'll give you the screen. There, you can share your screen now.
Great, thank you. And I'm not sure, it's been an hour and a half, so I'm not sure if the folks here want to take a break at all.
I think if someone needs to pop up and go somewhere, they can just pop up and go.
Yeah, I think it's going to take me a minute or two to get my screen going, so. Right.
Yeah, you're up.
Great. Can you see the presentation?
Yes. Yep, you're fine.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, because my presentation is quite slide heavy. Great. So as Mary introduced me, I'm with the Carrot Project. We are a nonprofit that supports farm and food businesses with a bunch of different farm and business resources. And today we're looking forward to following up from Kip and Emily's presentations and talking a little bit more about the financial end of things. So they shared a lot of really excellent resources for disaster assistance, some good things to think about as you're managing and adapting to climate risk from a production standpoint. And so we're here to talk a little bit about it from a financial standpoint. So just because some of this information is going to get pretty technical, I am kind of curious to just know about folks like baseline already and understanding crop insurance, or just getting a sense of who's in the room in terms of what they're currently producing. So Angelina, Corey, Hannah, if you happen to be there, if you happen to want to share, I'm just kind of curious, like how much do you already know? What are you producing? What are you interested in? Just opening that up right now. Yeah, so if at any point you do have any questions, please feel free to jump in. Oh, I think I see a chat coming in. I actually can't see the chat. Mary, would you mind reading off any chat information? It's not showing up while I'm sharing my screen. I can just see that someone pinged. I'm actually just going to stop sharing my screen so I can see this. Okay.
Amanda, I can read it to you if you can't see it there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, from Hannah. I run a 15-acre diversified vegetable farm primarily for CSA, and I know very little about crop insurance. And then from Corey, I have goats on about 6 acres producing milk via herd shares and USDA processed meat for sale at farmers markets.
Okay, great. So we have a little bit of mix of livestock. We have some vegetable producers. So great. Yeah, we can definitely cover the programs that can support both of your operations. And just want to double check again, can folks see my screen again with the presentation?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Couple of technical difficulties. All right. So as I said, so the CARE Project, we're a nonprofit that supports farm and food businesses on a variety of different things, kind of the three prongs to our service. So we have trainings and workshops, such as what we're doing today. We have one-on-one support that we can provide. So in addition to the one-on-one sessions that Mary and Yukon are arranging for later on this winter, we also just do that. And that's a service that we have available year round. And the final thing is we do have a number of loan programs as well, which is a little less relevant for today, but is a resource that we can provide folks. In terms of ways to build financial resiliency into your business, there are a number of different options that are available. So Dr. Cole already covered one of them, which is FSA Disaster Assistance. We'll be covering some of the crop insurance options that are available. Kip talked a little bit about diversification. We'll be talking about that as well. Self-insurance or building of an emergency fund. We're going to be covering steps to do that as well. And then finally, I just want to call out, there are also a number of different resources that are available, sometimes through the State Department of Agriculture, sometimes through other nonprofit organizations, such as grants or emergency funds. Those are also things to just be aware of and to keep your eye on. So option number 1 and number 2 are those USDA programs, and we're going to be covering the crop insurance portions. So when we think of crop insurance, I know this is what kind of comes to mind, which is a very traditional crop insurance product. And so these crop insurance programs are what's called single commodity policies. So what you do is you say, okay, I'm producing a lot of corn, or I'm producing a lot of apples, or I'm producing peaches. I'm going to buy a corn policy or an apple policy or a peach policy. And what it does typically is it insures that particular commodity or that particular crop against losses due to weather. So within that, that is going to be based on your own average yields over time. And then within that, it can either protect yields. So let's say, I don't know, I am insuring my corn for 170 bushels an acre. I only make 140 bushels an acre that year, so it's a difference of 30. Then I would get like a payout based on that difference of 30 bushels an acre of a loss. And that can either be based on the yield itself, so based on the 30 bushels of acre, or there's options for revenue protection, which means, so that's the price has also changed. So the markets have gone up since when you bought that policy. If you choose revenue protection, then you can actually protect against the change in the price in the markets as well. So these are the very, I think what most people think of when they think of crop insurance. These are the options that have been available for quite a long time. But one of the things that works about these policies is the farmers don't get to set the prices. So these prices are going to be set by either the USDA itself or it's going to be set by like external, like market prices. I think it's the Chicago Board of Trade, I think, is what will set some of these prices. So in places like here in the Northeast, where we might have access to markets that can pay a lot higher, sometimes this doesn't really account for those extra prices. And so farmers here, we're doing direct sales, we're doing CSAs, we're doing, I think, the milk production that someone had mentioned, so we're able to command higher prices than USDA might be able to provide through their own policies. So what do we do about that? So what if your farm looks more like this? So this is a very average farm for what the Carrot Project work was. So 50 acres, 10 or more different enterprises versus, say, if I was just a corn producer, I might have just like fields and fields and fields of like single commodity crops, 500,000 or less in annual revenue. So what are the crop insurance options that are available for a farm that looks much more like what we see here in New England? And so today we're going to be covering some of those options. And so that would be whole farm revenue protection. That's going to be micro farm, which is an addendum to the whole farm revenue protection, pasture, rangeland, and forage. And finally, we're also going to be covering, as you're looking at these different options, how do I determine if that's right for myself? Or can I like essentially self-insure by building an emergency fund? So do want to just take a quick note today that we're just going to be covering a number of different options. But I'm not here today to say, you should do this program or you ought to do that program. It's more just, laying out the options. What should you think about? What are the questions you should be asking yourself as a farmer to consider which ones are best for you? Great. So a couple of just insurance basics, acknowledging that I think most folks will have some degree of familiarity with insurance, whether that's a home or auto insurance, health insurance, business liability insurance. So kind of how insurance works basically, right, is everyone buys into this pool, and by all of us putting in a little bit of money, we're paying to spread out that risk. So hopefully not everyone experiences risk at one time. The folks who need to draw from that pool because they've experienced some unfortunate events gets to pull from that. And so typically, if you're someone with higher risk, the insurance company is going to say, all right, put in a little bit higher in premium to make up for that risk. And so as with all insurance, it's really designed to help you stay in business if you have a major loss. So, I'm just thinking for my general, say, farm liability, I'm putting in every single year. Let's say someone unfortunately slips on my farm and they decide to come at me. That would allow me to stay in business if I had some kind of a loss like that. So kind of another thing too, to just be aware of is with traditional insurances or other insurance policies, they've kind of planned things out so that you don't want to expect to get more in payments than you put in premiums in the long run. So you're putting in premiums, you're hoping to not have to use that insurance typically. And so in the long run, you may not get more in payments than you would in premiums. So that is a difference actually from crop insurance. So one of the major questions that I get is, if I was to file a claim because I have some kind of loss in my crops, does that mean a change in my premium costs, or am I going to be denied coverage? No, that's not the case. So crop insurance is set by the USDA and is offered through RMA. And so so if you tap into this program, you are not going to increase your premium. It's not dependent on your particular farm's risk. So that is something I just really want to highlight. And so another major thing that I want to highlight is that with crop insurance products, it can only insure against weather-related damages. So we're going to be touching a little later on in the presentation what is allowable versus not allowable causes for risk, but do want to just call out it has to be weather-related. And the final piece of vocabulary is something called an approved insurance provider, or an AIP. Basically, USDA sets the policies, USDA sets the prices, but the programs are themselves sold through third-party crop insurance companies. Those companies need to be licensed by the USDA, so don't just go to some random person who claims that they can sell it. You do want to check with the USDA that that person is licensed, and that So and the licensed insurance providers are going to be called AIPs, which is what you probably will be seeing in different crop insurance like resources. Any questions so far about kind of the basics of insurance, basics of crop insurance? And again, feel free to just unmute yourself, jump in at any point if you have any questions. Nope. All right, great. So we're going to dive right in. So as the name suggests, with whole farm revenue protection, this is a revenue-based insurance from USDA. And the primary difference between this and some of the other revenue protections, our other revenue protection is going to be based on prices that USDA or a third-party market sets. With whole farm revenue and micro farm, it is acknowledging that certain farmers might have their own prices that they want to set. And so this program is based on your own farm's prices. So how does this program work? So basically, you can think of it as like they're going to be weighing two sides. So as they're determining coverage, what they're going to do is they're going to look at your historic yields and your estimated yields for the next year. So what they're going to say is for micro farm, so micro farm is insurance that can cover up to $350,000 in revenue. Whole farm revenue is going to be up to $35 million of revenue, with the actual coverage being $17 million. And so with micro farm, what they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, let's take the past 3 years of your farm tax forms and let's average that out. With whole farm, they're going to take at least your past 5 years of tax forms and average that out. Then they're going to compare that to what you plan to produce in the following year. So kind of an example here is, so let's say in over the past 3-5 years, I have historically made $200,000 worth. But next year, because of, I don't know, just I'm deciding to really expand my revenue. I have some really new, interesting crop production methods I took from KIP. And so I'm really excited to try that out. And I'm expecting, say, $300,000. The insurance company is going to say, okay, well, you've only ever proven that you can make 200,000. We're not going to insure you for the 300. We're going to insure you for the 200, which is what we know you've been able to produce. So the opposite is also true. So let's say, again, historically, I've been able to produce 200,000 next year because, I don't know, maybe I've decided to go back to school. And so because of that, I have less time. Maybe I'm taking on another job. Again, I have less time. And so now I'm projecting 100,000 between my historic of 200 and my estimated of 100. I can't go to them and say, oh, well, I've made 200,000 historically. I want to be insured for 200. They're going to say, well, but you only plan to produce $100,000. We're going to have to insure the lower. So they're going to weigh, again, your historics against your futures, and that approved revenue is going to be the lower of the two. So the farm operation report, which is to help them determine what your estimated revenue is, that is going to be based on your planned production. So they're going to want to see things like your production plans, maybe even like how much seed or supplies that you're ordering. On your historic side, they're going to be basing that off of your farm tax form. So you do need to have been filing some sort of farm taxes in order to do this. If you haven't been filing taxes or you are tax exempt for whatever reason, there are alternative paperwork that you can fill out to in order to apply for this program. Great. All right. So after they've taken the lower of the two and they've calculated out your approved revenue, what they're then going to do is ask you to select a coverage level. So as Dr. Cole had mentioned before, the other USDA programs, the coverage isn't going to be 100%. That is also the case with crop insurance. And so the range here is 50% to 85%, which is pretty typical of other crop insurance products. So that's, say, as an example, if I was approved for $100,000 in revenue, the maximum coverage that I could insure of that 100,000 would be 85,000. And the lowest that I could choose is equivalent of catastrophic like catastrophic loss, which would be 50%, that would be $50,000. So if I have an approved of $100,000, the coverage range that I could actually insure for would be 50 to 85,000. So just as a reminder, it can't cover 100% of your losses, but it absolutely can be enough to get you through to the next season. And in later slides, we're going to be talking about questions to ask or things to consider in deciding what the optimal coverage amount for your particular farm is. So I do also want to just make a note that there are certain adjustments that your insurance agent can do to kind of massage the numbers a little bit to account for increasing revenue or some bad years. So let's say if you've had, so let's say last year was really, really bad, but the previous 2 years were pretty good. We don't want to let that one bad year drag down your average. So there are ways to kind of account for blips in your history over time. Okay, so what can be insured under these two programs? So on the approved revenue side, anything that is an agricultural product that is produced on farm. It also does cover a certain amount of resale of agricultural products as long as it's less than 50%. So I think someone had mentioned the CSAs that say you have carrots in your CSA, you have been able to produce enough carrots, so you purchase carrots from another farmer to put in. That would be allowed under this because you can resell. You just can't have more than 50% of all your revenue be from that resale, because in that case, I don't think they consider you a farmer. I think they consider you more like a retailer. So under micro farm, and this is pretty cool because no other USDA program that I'm aware of allows for coverage of these type of revenues, but revenue from post-production processing. So let's say you're freezing your fruit, you're drying some of your fruit. So freezing, drying, packing, any of that post-production processing, any of the value that is added because of that is covered under micro farm. Also with micro farm, any other additional value added things that you might be doing. So let's say I'm growing blueberries and making that into a blueberry jam. I'm growing tomatoes and making that into salsas, any jellies, pies, anything else that is produced from the products that you created on farm. Again, that actually is also covered under micro farm, which is not covered in any other crop insurance product I'm aware of. So the totality of all those approved revenues, as I had said earlier, for micro farm, all of the above needs to be $350,000 or less. For whole farm, the insurable amount goes up to 17 million, but the total amount of revenue you can have is 35 million. So where that comes from is if you think about the lowest coverage level that you can select, which is 50%, 50% of 35 million is 17 million. So that's how whole farm is done. Whole farm is done. All right, so what cannot be insured? So on your non-approved revenue sources, so it does not cover timber, it does not cover forest or forest products, animals for sport, show, or pets. So any revenue from your non-farm products, let's say on your farm stand, you're also selling like tote bags with your farm name on it, recipe books, stickers I see pretty often. Those things are non-agricultural products, they wouldn't be included. Any questions about what can be insured, what cannot be insured, or any questions about the program so far? Nope. All right, we'll keep moving. Great. So how does the application process work? So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get in contact with your crop insurance agent. So actually, let me just get all the information onto the screen here. So, so as I had said earlier, all of these programs are sold through third-party crop insurance agents. So you do want to get in touch with someone as soon as possible is what we would really suggest, because after you fill in that policy, you can start being covered. So we want you to be covered as soon as you can. The sales closing date is the last date by which you can apply for this. I know at a recent conference, one of the insurance agents did say at least a week in advance. I've also heard a month in advance just to make sure that all the paperwork can get in. But for whole farm, that insurance closing date is going to be the 15th. For microfarm, that's going to be April 15th. And so that is the point at which you would need those historic revenue records and your farm operation report as part of your insurance application. So in the summer, you are then going to submit what's called the revised farm operation report. So it's accounting for the fact that, production plans will change over the summer. So what you plan to produce in March or April may not end up being what happens. And so there is a chance to revise that come the summer. The insurance premium is then going to be due in August. So it's giving you a little bit of time between when you purchase the insurance product and when you actually have to pay for it, to account for the fact that it's going to take you a little bit of time to make some money. So that's August 15th. That premium is going to be based on a number of different things. So how much you plan to insure, the level of coverage. So as you can imagine, an 85% coverage is going to be more expensive than a 50% coverage. As with some of the disaster assistance programs, the premium is also going to change county to county. So some counties might have much more historic, like say flood risks, or have had a lot more natural disasters. A county like that might have a somewhat increased cost. Conservation compliance. So because these are USDA programs, the USDA can actually subsidize a portion of your premium. But in order for you to be subsidized, they do require that you be registered with the USDA, and they want to ensure that you are compliant with conservation measures in your area. So we're going to cover a little bit more detail how those premiums work. Commodity count, that's only applicable for whole farm revenue. And there are, as I said earlier, additional adjustments that can be available to help tweak the numbers a little bit. So some of those adjustments can also be based on whether you're a beginning farmer, so less than 10 years, or if you're a veteran, you may be eligible for certain premium reductions. So once you have the insurance program in place, anytime that there's any kind of loss, you do need to notify your agent. So causes of loss that say your fields flood, which in March, April, and that's preventing you from being able to plant. And so your production window has shifted back a little bit. That could be a reason to notify your agent. And so you just need to make sure that you notify within 72 hours. Let's say later on the season, there's hail, it destroys a portion of your crops. That would be another reason. And so you would just keep notifying them throughout the year. And they may send someone out to check on the claim. They might be asking for pictures, stuff like that. And finally, you would submit the final claim after the taxes have been filed for the coverage year. So it does run year to year. So for the 2024 coverage year, let's say that you do get these insurance products in 2024, come like January to April of 2025, after you filed your farm taxes, that's when they're going to take a look at your revenue and see if it was below what you had planned for or your approved revenue when you had purchased the policy. All right. So just some more details on causes of losses. So eligible causes all need to be weather related, and they must be considered outside of the farmer's control. So as I had said, you do need to prepare to prove your claims. So let's say you walk through your fields, there's been just all the rain that we've been getting recently, and so your tomatoes have split. And this has caused your tomatoes to lose value or to not be marketable. You would need to alert your insurance agent to say, hey, Joe, the insurance agent, my tomatoes are split. I think that this is going to cause a dip in my revenue for the year. And that's because of all the weather that we've been getting. They would then ask you to say, okay, well, we're going to send someone out to either inspect your tomatoes or take pictures of the tomatoes, send them along to us. So that would be kind of what to expect in terms of proving your claim. So ineligible causes of loss. So things that essentially are man-made or things that they would consider to be somewhat in the farmer's control. So labor shortages, inability to market, lack of sales, poor management and production practices. So I can't, claim to be producing $100,000 worth of crops, but then it turns out that I'm just not irrigating my crops, even though I have irrigation, or I'm just not weeding or not taking good care of my crops. In that case, they're not going to cover you. So they are, again, going to ask to see records to make sure that you are managing and producing properly. Any damage caused by humans. So the picture on this slide here, I believe is of ATV damage that's on fields, which absolutely can damage your fields. Something like that, you might be able to get, say, like civil damages if you know who covered it. But unfortunately, that wouldn't actually be something that crop insurance could cover because that's not weather related. And then the final one is damage covered by animals or pests. That's not usually covered. So if you can link it to, say, like increased pest pressure because of all the rain or other conditions, for example, there might be a case for that. One of the questions I get typically is like deer. I don't think deer are covered in some cases, but that's something that I would just encourage you to talk to an insurance agent about. Okay. Great. So let's go and look at a couple of examples right now. So in this case, and I think all my examples I've pulled are for Capital County or Hartford County. So Farm A has $50,000 in approved revenue. So if you think about the maximum and minimum coverage, so for maximum coverage at 85%, so 85% of 50, they can be covered for up to $42,500. On the lower end of things, $25,000. So in order to get this level of coverage, what can they expect to pay? So for the 85% coverage, they would be expecting to pay $1,900. But on the 50%, it would be $310. So I don't know about you, but the first time that I saw these numbers, I did experience a little bit of sticker shock, right? Like this is almost $2,000. And I'm only making, $50,000 a year. $2,000 out of that $50,000 is a pretty significant amount. Oops. However, I do want to point out here that these numbers are not linear. So I know that the eye tends to go towards the highest and then the lowest. I do want to point out that this jump between 85% and 80% is almost like 40% difference, even though it's only a 5% difference in coverage. And same thing here. So this is nearly a 50% difference for only a 5% difference. So just want to point out that this is not linear. So it's not like the higher coverage to the lower coverage is going to be linear. It's more of an exponential situation here. So if the highest coverage premium looks a little bit scary or looks like a lot, I would really encourage looking at some of the numbers in between here and figuring out, where the optimal coverage to premium is. Okay, so let's look at another example here. So $250,000. So again, 85% coverage, that would be covering $212,000. With 50%, that would be covering $125,000. So if I wanted to cover 85%, I could expect to pay $9,500 out of pocket to cover this amount. So, and then for this amount here, 125, I could expect to pay $1,500. So again, just pointing out that this is a lot linear. So between 85 and 80%, it's like a $4,000 change for only a 5% coverage in difference. And again, just looking at these numbers, it's not linear. So the numbers lower here are all pretty similar, but the jumps in between the coverage at the higher levels are different. So I kind of read this as like kind of incentivizing farmers to really look at this central portion here. So finally, let's look at 500,000. So the previous two examples that we had used, because those are below 350, that would be the micro farm policies. With 500,000, this would be the whole farm revenue protection policies. So one of the key differences between whole farm and micro farm, with micro farm, in recognition that it's a smaller amount and these typically tend to be smaller farmers, you can lump in all of your revenue together. With whole farm, what they're going to ask for is they're going to actually ask to separate out all of your commodities. and they want to look at the expected revenue for all of these different policies, for all the different crops. So in this case, as an example, I did apples for 125, corn for 250, and potatoes for 125 for a grand total of 500. So in this case, 85% coverage of 425,000, 50% coverage of 250,000. The premiums that I could expect to pay for this amount of coverage would be 24,000. The premiums I could expect to pay for the 50% coverage is 2,800. So you can see there's quite a difference in between the premium costs for these two different levels of coverage. And later on in the presentation, we will cover a little bit more how to decide for you and your farm what the optimal numbers are for you. So again, just pointing out, this isn't linear. So you can see a 50% jump, again, a 50% jump. So if 24,000 looks way, way, way too high, maybe 75% coverage makes more sense given the cost to benefit ratio. Great. So kind of another way of looking at this. So if we dive a little bit deeper at this $250,000 farm example, I honestly let's just ignore the 85% because it is just so high compared to the 80%. So if we look at 80%, 70%, and 50%, one way to think of this is if your coverage, so this liability line is your coverage line here, you can think of this as like the trigger point essentially is going to be the dollar level below. So in this case, I am expecting to make $250,000 next year. This insurance policy will only kick in below this number. So I have to make $199,999 or below for my premium to kick in. So let's say this year I end up making $150,000. That would be a difference of 200. So between 200 and 150,000, the $50,000 difference is what I could put a claim in for. So kind of, different ways of looking at this is if this premium seems very high, you can also think of it this way. So I really am expecting to make 250,000. So this premium as a percentage of what I expect to make, which is 250,000, is 2.22%. So am I willing to pay 2.2% of what I expect to make in the year to guarantee myself an income of 200,000 for the year? So, looking at some of these other coverage levels, the premium cost to cover 70% of my crop, so to get 70% coverage, am I willing to pay 1.16% to guarantee myself a revenue of 175 for the year? And with 50%, 1,500, which is the premium for this, am I willing to spend 6.62% of my expected income in order to guarantee myself that I will definitely be making 125,000 for the year? So just another way of looking at this. Any questions about this? I know I just kind of flew through the numbers and the premium costs, and I know this can be a little bit confusing, especially if you've never worked with crop insurance before. I'm going to give a minute for folks to ask any questions. Nope. All right, we're just going to move on then. Okay, so again, just looking at some scenarios here for 250,000. So as I had said earlier, if my coverage is 175, I have to dip below that in order to put in a claim. So looking at this, which is 70% in scenario one, if I selected a coverage of 175, and let's say during the year, I ended up only producing 125,000, I could potentially receive a claim of $50,000 because my insurance policy has guaranteed me the difference between what I actually have produced and the coverage that I've selected. And so the payout that I could be expecting here is this $50,000 amount. Obviously, we need to subtract out the amount of money that I paid for my premium, which is this $2,900. So the total indemnity or payout that I could receive back is $47,000. So at the end of the year, if I had not had insurance, I would have only brought in $125,000. Because of my insurance, I have this $125,000 figure plus the indemnity minus the payout. So the total final revenue is $172,000. So to review that again in scenario 2, so let's say I have a coverage of $200,000, I end up only making $180,000. I could receive a payout of $20,000, which makes up the difference there. I would, again, of course, need to subtract out the premium. And so the final amount that I could receive from the insurance company is $14,000. And so my final revenue is $194,000, which is more than what I would have received if I had not had insurance. So scenario 3 here, I do just want to point out here, because of this premium cost, there can be scenarios where you end up paying more in premiums than what you receive back. So in this case, let's say I end up only producing $195,000, and so my payout is only $5,000 because that's the difference. Because my premium is actually higher than my payout, I could actually be paying more in premiums. And so the final revenue becomes lower than if I had had insurance. But the way to think about this is, you know, with insurance products, you don't want this just for year to year. So maybe this isn't scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3. Maybe it's more like this is year 1, year 2, year 3. Oh my goodness. Apologies for that. And so between these 3, if I think that there's a possibility that this year, you know, year 1 might be this scenario, year 2 might, you know, there's a possibilities for these losses in other years. It might be worth, even if scenario 3 occurs, it might still be worth it in the long run. So you don't want to just be looking at it year by year. You want to look at it as like over all of your years. And so just a couple of other scenarios here, because it is based on gross revenue, there are possibilities that if one crop does really well, but another crop doesn't, and your gross revenue doesn't change, you may not be able to claim for anything. Okay. So that was whole farm and micro farm. We're now going to move into some of these other programs here. So just want to take a quick break. Are there any questions about this program here? Nope. All right. Great. So this is another program that is offered through crop insurance programs. So this is called Pasture, Rangeland, and Forage. And so unlike the other policies, which are multi-peril, which means that it can cover a bunch of different causes of loss for a bunch of different weather events, this program is for single peril, which means that it will only cover changes in rainfall. So how this program works essentially is if you have pasture, rangeland, or forage lands, it's going to ensure the amount of rain as a proxy for the amount of production that can occur. So the different programs are available. So grazing, haying based on irrigation or non-irrigated, and organic haying are the different programs within it. So what's going to happen basically is you're going to select rainfall coverage in 2-month periods. And if the rainfall for the periods that you have selected dips below the coverage level and it dips below the average for that amount, you would automatically get a payout based on the difference in that rainfall. And so again, it's using rainfall as a proxy for the amount of production that occurs on your lands. So one of the benefits about this is there's no need to prove things. It's just automatically triggered based on the rainfall that occurs in your area. However, this is not going to be based on your actual farm. It's instead based on, I think it's like 17 mile by 17 mile grids And so it's whatever grid your farm happens to be in, that's going to be what covers you there. And so unfortunately, sales have actually already closed for 2024, but particularly for someone who produces goats here, if you're putting your goats out to pasture, this might be a program to look into for the following year. So for the 2025 coverage year. Great. So just a couple of examples of what the prices and the premiums look like here. So using Tolland as the grid here. So let's say that you're choosing 90% coverage here and you're doing grazing. So as in this slide here, because you're choosing two 2-month periods, let's say that I have chosen April to May as my period and then June to July as my periods. If I have a 50-acre farm, so the total acres here are 50 acres, I could expect to pay a total premium in April of $145 for my coverage. And so for June to July, the premium here is $163. So to just compare grazing versus haying, for example, the premium coverages here. So in April, May, the total premium that I could expect to pay for my 50 acres would be $687 for the April to May period. In June to July, it would be $773. Sorry, that's the total premium. The producer premium, the producer premium is in this rightmost column. So that's actually what the producer, so what you would expect to pay. So that is this program here. All right. So we just covered quite a lot of information about some of the crop insurance programs, but crop insurance may not be right for everyone. And there are definitely a lot of things that you want to think about and consider for your own farm as you're deciding whether or not crop insurance is right for you. And there also may be ways to build resiliency on your farm yourself. So something that I think a lot of Northeast farmers are already pretty good at is diversifying your farm income. So I think a lot of producers in this area have already doing this pretty well. So they're diversifying their crop production. A lot of folks are adding value-added products. So let's say you're making tomatoes, they're making salsas or sauces, tomato sauces out of that. Those are all really excellent ways to just decrease the risk by diversifying your farm revenue. So some other ways to do it is so if you add a number of different sales channels, so such as CSA shares, selling wholesale versus just direct to market. Those are all, again, excellent ways to diversify your farm revenue so that you're not relying on all your eggs being in one basket. Other really, other ways of diversifying your revenue. So agritourism, I'm seeing that increasingly from the farms that we work with, as well as the potential for having some off-farm income. So, for example, one of the farmers that we work with, he farms during the summers and throughout the spring to fall, and then in the winters, he has an off-farm consulting business where he's supporting other farmers. So those are all different ways of diversifying your farm income, so you're not just relying on one or two things for your farm. So, so in terms of managing risk, one of the things I think about is, on the one hand, there are preventative measures. So the preventative measures are things like diversifying your farm income. But we know that you can't predict for everything and you can't prepare for everything. So what if something still goes wrong? So some options are more like restorative options. So crop insurance is much more of a restorative option. But if you don't want crop insurance, you would need to provide some degree of self-insurance. And so with self-insurance, we like to think of that as basically it's an emergency fund. So as you're building an emergency fund, like how much do you know, like how much should you put aside? So with that, you want to really look at things like how much does it take to operate your farm? How much of a hit can your farm take in order to last from year to year? So some of the questions here that we have on this slide are like, how much are you able to put aside? What is your goal amount to have in your emergency fund? And then finally, can you resist using it for other purposes? So I know that, say you managed to save up a pretty good sized emergency fund of $50,000. I know having $50,000 in emergency fund can be quite tempting to use for other things or other purchases. Can you resist using that as you're looking at your emergency fund is something to just ask yourself. So in terms of comparing it to some of those crop insurance options, let's revisit the second farm, which is the $250,000 farm. So let's say that rather than paying an insurance company, I decide that I would rather just squirrel the money away and put it in a savings account. So if I want to have enough money to cover like a whole loss, so $200,000 at the premium amount of $5,000, that would take me 36 years of putting in premiums. However, I could theoretically put in more money into the emergency account than the premium. So let's say every year I can put in $10,000, or maybe I'm able to put away $15,000 this year. So that's not, a totally accurate comparison here. So, just ask yourself, how long would it take me to save this equivalent amount if that's the coverage amount that I want? So below here, and these slides will be sent around by Mary, you can see, a couple of scenarios that are actually much more realistic. So typically you won't see a total complete loss. You might just see a partial loss. So let's say, I have 200,000 in actual coverage, and I actually end up only making 180,000, which is much more typical. That difference, the payout is $20,000. So maybe it's much more likely that I would expect to see, say, a dip in $20,000. So how long would it take me to save up for $20,000 if that's really the amount that I want to save? So just a couple of different scenarios, and you can look through this later when the slides come around. So, just some things to think about as you're looking at these slides. So just additional comparisons between crop insurance and self-insurance. So on this left side column are some of the questions that I think it's valuable to ask yourself as you're comparing. So with crop insurance, you would need to enroll with an insurance agent, versus with self-insurance, it requires my self-saving and planning. In terms of what does it cost? With crop insurance, I would pay a premium every single year to enroll. With self-insurance, you would just self-insure for as much as you're able to put aside for your farm. One of the key differences here is with crop insurance versus self-insurance. So with crop insurance, it can only cover what's allowable by the policy, which is always going to be weather related. But let's say, looking at my historic farm losses, it's turned out to be sometimes it's because I'm not able to find enough labor. That wouldn't be covered under crop insurance, but it might be something that I want to prepare for and save for. That is something that would be able to be covered by self-insurance. So if I'm doing it on my own, I can cover whatever I need to cover. Some other key differences between crop insurance. So there is a lag time. So as I had said, it takes you like a full year. So you would have to wait between when you experience a loss and when your farm taxes go in order to receive a payout. With self-insurance, you can tap into that anytime you need. With crop insurance, because it's through a third party, you do need to submit a claim, versus with self-insurance, you don't need to. With crop insurance, as I had pointed out in an earlier slide, it does need to be below the trigger point. So if I'm only covered for 200,000, but I'm expecting to make 50,000, I have to dip below the trigger point for any loss, for any payout to come out. Whereas with self-insurance, I don't have to expect that trigger point. So any loss I could potentially be able to cover. And just a key difference here that I also want to point out is with crop insurance, in theory, if I'm suffering multiple years worth of losses, I could expect to get payouts and support year after year after year. With self-insurance, let's say I am able to cover and save up for one really bad year, and I'm able to save up 100,000, and I'm able to cover 1 year's loss. Are you able to then cover a second year of loss? So am I able to like save up enough to be able to cover subsequent years of losses? So you might be able to save up enough for 1 year's worth of loss, but you may not be able to continue covering year after year after year of loss. That is definitely an advantage, I think, that crop insurance has over self-insurance. So you're able to, so with self-insurance, you're only able to cover as much as you have put away for as long as the money lasts. In both cases, as you're analyzing what options are best for you, both do require a pretty solid understanding of your farm's finances in order to make good, confident choices for your farm's business. Great. So a couple of other questions to just ask yourself. What has my business's financial history looked like before? Have I been able to survive major losses on my own, or have I really struggled? And so having a third-party support system, such as with crop insurance, would that be helpful to me? What has caused my business to lose revenue in the past? Are these coverable? So was it weather related? Was it because of lack of markets? Was it because I struggled to find labor? Looking at the reasons that I've covered losses may help determine whether or not insurance could cover the risk factors that I'm looking at. Have I had back-to-back years or multiple years of losses that risk survival? How much of a hit can my business take? Am I able to maintain operations that year? How much do I need to stay in business next year? So as I'm looking at what coverage levels to go by, how much actually is your operational budget? That might be what you need as you're looking at coverage levels. What is likely to cause my business to lose revenue in the future? So again, looking at, as you're planning for the future and looking at what are your risk factors, those would be the things that you would want to look at and see if crop insurance could cover you. So finally, even if you are able to save and you decide that you want to build an emergency fund, even if you're able to do it, are you willing to do it? So maybe you would rather save and put the money towards investments on your farm, or purchasing of equipment, or expansion of various aspects of your farm. Maybe that's more important to you right now, in which case crop insurance makes more sense versus trying to build an emergency fund. And lastly, with all of this, it really depends on how comfortable with risk someone is. So some farmers might be really comfortable with the risk, and so they just want to be able to build an emergency fund. Other farmers might say, you know what, I just want to sleep better at night. And so to them, it makes sense to pay the premium every single year to ensure that they have coverage through crop insurance. So every person, everyone's risk tolerance is going to be very different. Great. So I know that was a ton of information. In an hour, it's pretty impossible to cover all the nuances of these programs. And I know that was a ton of information. So we are available to help you go over your farm's numbers and actually sit down with you and decide what options are best. So there are going to be one-on-one coaching sessions that Mary is going to send around signups for afterwards. We also have some tools that we have created online for microfarm insurance. So those tools are going to be available on our website. They're also available through this PowerPoint if you just click on this link. And we also have a 5-minute video series on YouTube, just so you can review this information that we covered here today. And finally, just a couple of federal resources. So if you're ready to tap into insurance and contact an insurance agent, this is the link to be able to find folks. The USDA office, this is the link here. And this is also a link if you want to estimate your premium costs. And I am also available to help plug in the numbers and go through your farm's specific numbers here. So yeah, just in summary, I'm really glad that everyone's here today to learn about different options and just plan ahead of time. Just a reminder again that insurance and disaster assistance can't cover everything. It's not going to cover 100% of your losses, but it's absolutely is able to help you mitigate risk, especially year after year. If you do want to use insurance, you do need to prepare to just be able to back up claims. And so you do want to prepare to have very strong records to present to your insurance agent. And the very last thing, and I think this is the most important thing, every person's farm and farm situation is going to be very, very, very different. And so because of that, we really encourage folks to really sit down and go through the numbers for your farm's unique situation. And every single farm is going to practice resilience in their own risk. And so making sure that you're keeping strong records is going to help you in analyzing and assessing what's best for your farm. Great. So thanks everyone so much. Thanks UConn for having us here today. Any questions?
Thanks, Amanda. I don't see anything coming up in the chat. Are you going to send me your PowerPoint to send out as okay, so I'll send out
Yes,
that
I will.
PowerPoint to everybody. Thank you. Thank you. So if no one has any questions, you will
Yes.
receive an email from me. Kip?
Oh,
Yep,
the
yeah.
other thing I was going to say is that that one of those sheets that I sent has the Department of Ag grants, and again, certainly USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. You can apply at any time. They have a lot of money for climate smart ag practices, and if you're on the UConn Solid Ground listserv, you're getting notification. But certainly, New Connecticut Farmers Alliance, Connecticut RC&D, Solid Ground all have opportunity, UConn Solid Ground all have opportunities to apply for funding for a whole host of different climate smart ag practices. So there's a lot of money and opportunity out there right now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That is good. Well, if there are no questions, okay, Emily's going to send her presentation over as well. Great. So we'll get a lot of emails are going to go out to you all later today, along with an evaluation, which you really hope you'll just take some time to just fill it out. It's very short. We need to know whether this was useful, that you learned something, that you might plan on using some of this information on your farm, in your business. If you're not going to do anything with it, then we kind of wasted our time. So I'm hoping that everyone learned something they're going to use in the future. I'll also send you the flyers for our upcoming programs as well. And you can sign up for any of those and the one-on-one sessions. So I guess if there's nothing else, we'll sign off and enjoy the snow today.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.